Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
It started off as a joke, and I'm kind of hoping it stays a joke, but there is at the very least a small group of people that have started to wear football boots with studs casually. And don't get me wrong, I love football boots as much as anybody, and maybe I just don't get fashion, but this is a bit of a weird trend. With this trend lining up perfectly with the return of one of Nike's most iconic football boot designs at a surprisingly affordable price tag. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the Nike Total 93 SP. Back after 21 years, this is easily one of Nike's most distinctive football boot designs of all time, with that off-centered lacing system and the signature T90 logo on the instep, where unlike most football boot remakes these days, you will not find any studs on the bottom of these T90s, and that's because there is a heavy streetwear focus with this particular release, with Nike emphasizing the fact that they want these to be casual wear sneakers rather than performance-oriented football boots. Although it must be said, the midsole and outsole that they've gone for here is very much along the lines of what you'd expect to find from a pair of indoor boots. So there definitely is a performance angle, or option I should say, with this particular product, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. But I think the biggest aspect of this release that's pretty surprising, especially coming from a big brand like Nike that's not necessarily known for great value, and that is the fact that these boots, in most colorways at least, retail for only $100. Where, let's be honest, $100 these days in the world of football boots doesn't really get you that far. So to get something seemingly so cool and nostalgic for just $100 almost seems too good to be true. And in some ways it is, because while I do think these definitely look really cool, there is nothing about them that I would say feels particularly premium. But then again, and according to Nike themselves, the focus here is more so for these to be a pair of streetwear sneakers rather than performance-oriented football boots. So with that in mind, we're going to break down all the details of the T93 SP, take a look at how they fit and feel on feet, and even compare them to an OG pair of Air Zoom Total 93s from 2004. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around and watch the entire review. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, while they've been out for a couple months now, the demand has been extremely high. So every colorway that's dropped has sold out almost immediately. So if there are any available, they will be linked on the review page of my website, which you can access via the first link down below, where hopefully as more and more colorways drop, availability will get better. And really quickly before we keep going, if you enjoy the videos, don't forget to drop a like on this one. And if you appreciate the unsugar-coated, unsponsored, brutally honest opinions on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. So first things first, I would like to pose the question, and please answer honestly down in the comment section, would you wear these as casual sneakers? Where obviously football boot inspired sneakers and sometimes even actual football boots apparently are a little bit on trend at the moment, but wearing these with, I don't know, say a pair of jeans, even a pair of shorts to be honest, just gives me, I'm 10 years old and am wearing my new football boots to school because I think they're really cool vibes. I guess if wearing your team's full kit ever becomes cool again, then a pair of sneakers like this really makes a lot of sense. But until that point, I think I'll only be wearing these to actually play in. Where speaking of, and like I mentioned earlier in the video, these are not expensive at $100, which I know isn't cheap, but in the grand scheme of football boots, you can pay basically 3 times as much. And I think that the quality of materials used is very much reflected in the price tag, where I do think that this feels like an equivalent of a lot of $100 takedown model football boots. Where yes, they absolutely look the part, and considering that this is a football boot that originally came out in 2004, most synthetic boots at this time didn't necessarily have that overly premium appearance. They all have that kind of plasticky sheen to them. So as far as the aesthetic is concerned, it's very convincing and true to the original, but to the touch, and especially on your feet, this really does feel like any other takedown model that you'd get for around the same price. Where in Nike's defense, this technically is being presented as a takedown model in that this is the Total 93, where if you know your football boots, then you know that an OG pair back in 2004, if you wanted the high-end one, you had to buy the Air Zoom Total 93, which not only gave you a small zoom unit underneath the heel, but it also swapped out what is a much cheaper synthetic material for a more premium KNG 100 synthetic upper that maybe doesn't look that much nicer than what you have here on this new $100 re-release, but to the touch, it's very evident that this is far more premium than this. Where I'll be honest, for the sake of price point, and given the fact that Nike is more so gearing this towards casual wear rather than performance, I'm not necessarily mad at the materials that they've gone for. I actually think it's pretty refreshing for them to keep the price lower rather than charging double just to have a nicer upper, where if you're not really making them with studs on the bottom, I'm not sure most people interested in this type of product really care anyways. Having said that, the synthetic upper is a padded cheap synthetic with all the signature elements from that T93 with the stitching in the forefoot, that signature off-centered lacing system, and then basically what is a wraparound burrito style tongue wrapping from the inside where you have that giant T90 logo, and then it kind of tucks in the outside edge of the upper with a lacing system featuring single lace holes along the outside, and then a really unique dual lace hole setup along the burrito style tongue, where we're used to seeing double lace holes on a lot of modern football boots, where normally there's just two holes in the upper where the lace goes in one side, comes out the other, and you can actually feel it on the inside of the football boot. That is not the case with these at all. Where if you loosen the laces, you can see that none of those laces are exposed on the inside of the boot. They basically just flow in this kind of section within the layers of materials of the upper, so you can't feel it on the top of your foot, which is just a really unique way of designing a pair of football boots, and really what made the T90 as a standalone line different from everything else, in that you had this huge striking area free of any obstruction, where the idea was that if you really like the idea of a power boot like an Adidas Predator but wanted something that was a little bit more sleek and streamlined, the T93 was that alternative. However, if there's one thing that I remember about this particular design, it was the fact that it just wasn't very comfortable, particularly across the top of the foot, basically at the opening of the football boot. And while there does look to be tons and tons of padding here, immediately when I put these on and tied the laces tight, that same really unusual and borderline uncomfortable pressure, basically from here to here with this material kind of digging into the front of your foot, is still present on the remake, which I suppose is a negative, but it's also very true to the original. In fact, I'd actually argue it's a little bit better on the remake than the OG, where given the top end model had this kind of synthetic material lining the edge with far less padding, where if anybody had a pair of these, getting blisters on the top part of your foot as it kind of flows into your ankle was very common with the T93. It's part of the reason why I never had a pair of these as a kid. Always thought they were cool, but also always found them ridiculously uncomfortable. I still think they're uncomfortable here on the remake sneakers, which is a bit surprising, again, given the casual wear focus of this particular release, but it also might be an explanation as to why they went for the cheaper upper variation with just slightly softer, thinner synthetic and borderline just more padding with this mesh material around this tongue opening area. Moving to the rear, the design very much emphasizes comfort rather than kind of lockdown and performance, where it is of course a low cut construction. You can see it's a fairly large and wide opening with tons and tons of padding. It's lined in this mesh material. You have a little bit of structure from some kind of internal plastic, although it is more on the pliable side. And then the insole, you can see, does have a little bit of that original design, but it is fully glued in place and non-removable. And then as for the midsole, outsole, I genuinely have no idea whether or not this is true to an original pair of indoor T93s or if this is just a completely new design altogether. But as you can see, there is an unspecified type of foam in white running through the heel and midfoot, as we see with so many indoor boots. That's left fully exposed, and then as you get to the forefoot, the rubber kind of comes up the side and connects along the border of the upper, just to strengthen the bond and generally just give it more of that kind of indoor boot look. With the rubber itself covering the entire bottom of the foot, you have a little bit of like a narrowing split through the midfoot that reveals more of that white foam on the bottom. But then you'll also find a traction pattern that combines a little bit of herringbone and kind of these little nubs with a suction cup in the middle of the forefoot and a suction cup in the middle of the heel. Where from a traction standpoint, again, it's geared towards kind of outdoor use, meaning concrete, asphalt, whatever it may be, out in the streets, if you will, given the streetwear inspiration. That's not to say that you couldn't wear these on a clean indoor court, because they will do quite well on that type of surface, given this classic herringbone finish, although it is worth noting that the rubber is definitely on the harder side. And as far as the feel of the outsole is concerned, very flexible through the forefoot in that the foam thins out quite significantly, where you really don't have much in the way of cushion here. And in general, they feel like they look kind of like cheaper indoor boots underfoot, which I'll be honest, isn't the most comfortable thing in the world. And then not that it really matters too much, if you're wondering how much they weigh, we're about to find out. In a size 10 US on a scale, the T93 SP weighs in at 10.6 ounces, the equivalent of 301 grams, which puts them in the same weight range as something along the lines of a classic Adidas Copa Mundial. So obviously not super lightweight, but as far as indoors go, especially one with an upper that originally came out in 2004, I definitely wouldn't classify them as heavy. On feet, I think they look really cool, but when you put these on, you'll immediately notice a couple different things. The first thing is that this particular lacing system, as cool as it is, being so pushed to the outside, it's just not very effective because of how wide they've made the overall shape. It pretty much just goes as tight as possible, and if that's not tight enough for you, then you're pretty much out of luck. Also, I know that they are not charging a ton of money for these, but the laces that Nike have used on this pair is as cheap as they can possibly be. I wish they would have used slightly higher quality laces. And then there's the overall comfort and fit of the football boot, where again, you look down at your feet and you think, wow, the laces are completely out of the way, but then you bend your foot and you see how much of that material kind of pulls away from your foot in that area that's been clear of laces. So as far as this being a great design in terms of feel and just the way that it wraps your foot, the truth is, as iconic as this design is, it's just not all that great. Especially with the cheaper materials that they've opted for with this particular re-release. I've never really been a big fan of the way the T93 kind of fits, and I can't say that my opinion has really changed all that much. Something that is also immediately noticeable when you tie the laces tight is all the pressure around the front part of your foot, basically at the opening. There is just no bend here, and of course that does get better as you wear them in, mainly based on your foot just getting used to that pressure. But again, on especially the high-end pairs back in the day that didn't have this kind of more padded mesh material, getting a blister at that part of your foot was actually very common, which is not something that you see very often in a pair of football boots. So again, cool design, but flawed in a lot of ways. As far as the outsole is concerned, it's a slightly elevated heel, but in general, they're quite flat with minimal padding underfoot, especially in the toe box and forefoot area. You really feel like you're just standing on top of rubber with a little bit of foam cushion from the insole. The heel lockdown is okay, but in general, it's very wide and very open as far as its shaping is concerned. And generally, they just don't feel very performance oriented in the way that they fit. Speaking of which, from a width perspective, they definitely have some decent width to them all the way through. I do not think that these are sneakers that are not going to work for most people. If you have extremely wide feet, the design in general might not be the best for for you, but I think from a width perspective, they should work all right for the vast majority. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I went for a size 10 US, which is what I typically wear in indoors. And these actually are a smidge longer than normal, maybe about a quarter size. So if you're wearing them as sneakers, I would say going true to size to a half size up, depending on what you normally do, is probably the way to go. And if you intend on wearing these as actual indoor boots to play in, sticking true to size if your boots already fit quite snug is probably the right move. But if you find that you already have a little bit of extra space, going half a size down might not be a bad idea. So in conclusion, as a pair of indoor football boots, I genuinely don't think these are very good. But that shouldn't be too surprising given that that's not what they're technically designed for. With the streetwear focus being very evident in the way that these fit and feel, which I also think is reflected in the price tag given the quality that you're getting. For me, this is a pair of sneakers that you should buy for the sake of, I guess, fashion. If you think wearing these with a pair of jeans would look cool, then by all means be my guest. Or this is a pair of sneakers that you buy purely for nostalgia, where yes, you absolutely could use them to play football and they'll do just fine, but they also have all the negatives of the OG 2004 T90 design that I still don't think feels very good 21 years later. But if you had a pair way back then and want to experience it again, you can do so for just $100, which is pretty cool.